Welcome to 239 Uncensored, everything Southwest Florida and beyond. I am your host, Shannon Livingston, and I am joined by my offspring, Joe Labasco.
I was going to say I'm Tim Jarrett, but I lost that opportunity.
Everybody knows Tim is not that good looking. So Tim is off having a great time today, doing whatever he's doing. We don't ask a lot of questions of Tim so that he doesn't ask us a lot of questions. It's just safer for everyone that way. But we have Diana here in the studio, even though she's off camera and off mic. She's running the show as usual. So thank you so much for keeping us in line, Diana.
Always got to have a guy in the chair.
Or a girl.
Or a girl. Or a however you choose to identify. That's your business.
Oh, my gosh. We're not even going to get into that. So today we are going to get in to some other stuff, which you were not happy about. You've been giving me a hard time this whole time. Diana, is this music going to go on forever? Or are we going to, is that?
Need to change that to the Alan Parsons Project.
It's all Tim's stuff, but he likes to play the music really, really loud so that it goes over whatever it is that I'm saying.
So he can drown you out and dominate the show.
Yeah. So she has to kind of represent while he's gone to make sure that the music goes over me.
Well done.
Yeah, it is. So I think we're going to have a guest joining us today. I'm not sure. Good. She is joining us today. I'm terrible at technology, so I'm always afraid to overpromise and underdeliver. And but we're going to talk about something that you and I have in common today. And also kind of just relates to some current events. So today we're going to talk to Mo, but let's keep her on hold for just a minute. Sorry, Mariah. We'll get to you because I wanted to talk about a couple things that are going on currently that relates to cannabis in one way or another. And it was just really accidental. I saw a couple of stories that I sent to Diana that I wanted to cover. So Diana, first, can we do the one about the bride? There was a bride in Florida. Did you see this, Joe?
Yes, I did.
Did I send you the story?
Well, I had heard about it already.
She and her caterer, look at this. So she really, very nice looking woman. She and her caterer thought it would be a great idea to medicate the food at her wedding reception and not tell anyone, any of the guests, that it was infused. And so what ended up happening, of course, is people were calling 911. They didn't feel well. Some people were dizzy. Some people had maybe heart racing or whatever. And the caterer and the bride both got arrested.
Of course they did.
Well, so the law in Florida right now, we have medical cannabis.
Right.
And that means that you don't dose up your whole wedding party and all of your guests.
Well, first of all, this is what Dave Chappelle would refer to as a waste of weed.
It is a waste of weed.
What are you,
those people are not even
doing?
asking for it, right? And that's a lot to put into all of your food.
Yeah,
I think it was in the olive oil.
Not only is that shady and illegal, but it's a waste of weed. You've spent. It couldn't have been cheap to get all that THC infused into all that food, which is also illegal in Florida. We get a lot of these questions. As someone who works in the industry about what you can and can't do in public places. And the answer is really nothing.
Yeah. So when you say you work in the industry, we won't say the dispensary that you work for, but you work in a dispensary in Florida.
I work in a dispensary. Yeah. I'm part of the management team at one of the dispensaries in Florida.
In the legal market. So that is one of the few things that you and I have in common, maybe some movies and music, but our work in cannabis. And so not the way to do it. That is not what either one of us advocate for. That's not the go ahead.
That's not going to, that doesn't help the mission, not to sound too preachy, but getting people who have no tolerance, no expectation, no
consent.
Right. High out of their mind isn't going to, like, what reaction did they expect?
Speed it up. You're such a slow talker. I'm getting lost just listening to you.
I just asked you, what reaction did they expect?
What reaction did the bride expect? She thought it was funny from what I read. Yeah, she really did.
It's funny now.
And I know you're saying that sarcastically, but like you said, it does go against the mission of trying to have, oh my gosh, I'm
oh yeah, now who can't get the words out?
Working with you makes me choke up, I guess. Excuse me.
So,
but it does go against the mission of safe legal access for people to medical cannabis and even recreational. We live in a medical state now, but I am a proponent for adult use. I don't know how
Sure.
you feel.
Yeah, I think that I'm a definitely a free market type of person. I feel like we should just do what Canada did and eliminate all of these obstacles and questions and let people decide for themselves.
Yeah. And I have to say, most of our listeners are used to Tim being here, and Tim is previous law enforcement for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
And he and I have had this conversation about cannabis, and he supports medical cannabis, but is concerned that it can be abused, that people are abusing the system, even medically. And
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, but that's your legislation isn't going to
isn't going to stop
stop
the
that.
abuse. Yeah,
So, and in terms of what these two people did, it's just dumb.
it was dumb.
You don't,
Inconsiderate of your guest.
anybody who is, if her and her caterer, or I don't know about a caterer, but if she is a regular user, then you know that ingesting too much at one time, particularly when you're not expecting it, is not a lot of fun.
Well, and I'll also throw in some science. When you ingest it, it is more psychoactive than when you smoke it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Edibles hit people harder. They last longer. So,
Look, Joe, you have a fan. Leslie's saying hello.
Oh.
I ran into her in Walgreens one day. She recognized my voice, and now we're friends forever and ever.
All right.
So, all right. So that's a good break. I don't want to leave Mariah on hold for too long. And it's a good segue talking about legalization and how do we do it right? We've seen how we do it wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Please do not abuse the program and do not dope up your friends when they are not asking for that. So what we're really talking about with cannabis, and again, these are my views, maybe Joe's, maybe our guest, not necessarily that of the 239 studio, that of Tim Jarrett. So I want to give him that caveat, but that is part of the platform. I'm very grateful that he and I can have different views and discuss different things. So today we're going to discuss just a couple different viewpoints, but not Tim's, because he's not here. You have to be in the room. So let's bring on our guest, Mariah Barnhart. Mariah and I met, gosh, I don't know how many years ago. Oh, you look so pretty, Mo. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Great, great. So Mo, you and I met actually through the organization Canna Moms, and I know we're going to focus more on whys today. So let's just start with who the heck are you? What do you do? Can you tell our listeners in the 239 a little bit about yourself?
Well, so everyone knows the hashtag Canna Moms, but I think very few people actually know where that came from. So my daughter, Dahlia, was diagnosed with brain cancer at the age of 2 back in 2013, probably just before you and I met, Shannon. And Canna Moms was completely up and running by the following year in her first year of diagnosis. And since then, the advocacy has grown broader. Obviously, as the stigmas have become less and less, it was easier to make the mission broader and broader because there are so many issues other than just sick children, right? This isn't just about my daughter or even sick people. This is about every citizen of this country who's been injured by the war on drugs, and transitioning to WISE wasn't necessarily away from Canna Moms and into WISE. It was just the next step in ending prohibition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that there really is an evolution to the advocacy and the education that I received. And, part of that is you start out with THC and medical, and you do kind of learn more about prohibition and the harms that it's had on society. And you learn more about hemp than you ever thought you wanted to, when you start with cannabis. So tell us a little bit more about Canna Moms and what the mission is with Canna Moms and why that was necessary, because I think it's so necessary for people to know how families are affected, that it's not just one person. A whole family, a whole community can be affected by one diagnosis and somebody's access to medicine, which we have just received voted in 2016, but it doesn't mean that we have everything that we need now, even on the medical side. So take us back before legalization. what were parents doing that had children that needed cannabis to, survive, stop seizures? What was going on before the vote?
And so this is all very public information. I'm not naming names here, but a large portion of the mothers were given the choice to let your child suffer or break the law. And in many cases, mine included, that included federal felonies, a lot of them, the kind of felonies that people are imprisoned for life for. So once you realize that these are the kinds of things people are actually in prison for, it's a no-brainer that the laws just aren't right. But how to go about changing them can be very confusing. A lot of people have been trying for a lot of decades, and there hasn't been a lot of movement. So figuring out the why on that, who was doing what wasn't working, all of that early on top of dealing with, my daughter is still in treatment for brain cancer. So 9 years later, she just was taken off of her 4th trial and will be put onto a 5th. She goes to Memphis monthly. So, doing paperwork, submitting for federal nonprofits, the boring stuff nobody wants to hear about or do or help with, was what a lot of our lives were really consumed with. But the part of my work that I found so meaningful, I guess, and that's just, it's not even enough, but meaningful, is going and actually sitting with these families, going into their homes, being welcomed at the bedside of literally dying children and holding them, and realizing that these parents aren't being given options. The tyrannical government that we all like to talk about, there are real implications to that. Not everyone is going to see them in their lifetime to the degree that these parents would. So coming together as a group to encourage and support each other and give each other courage to do what we had to do for our children was very important. But we knew that in doing that, we were also creating a really strong lobbying group to change those laws. So coming back to Florida was our first experiment with that. And getting medical passed here as we move forward, obviously, to your statement, the medical program is too expensive and inaccessible for most people, especially truly suffering disabled patients and caregivers. And so even if you could care less about all the social justice issues around cannabis and the war on drugs, the truth is the people who actually need access to it still can't afford it or get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a free market issue, right? If you restrict it, and we do have a vertical market for people that don't understand what that is, what that looks like. It means that one company is going to fulfill every level of production. So
seed to sale.
So they're gonna grow it, they're gonna extract it, they're gonna package it, they're gonna ship it, they're gonna sell it. So you don't have different brands offering different prices, different options. You are really just locked into whatever that company wants to offer. And like you, Mo, I really, my father is an attorney, and so I have always been immersed in civil rights. But it's one thing to talk about it at the kitchen table, and it's quite another to, as you said, sit with families and hear how it really affects their lives. And the people that are in prison for choosing to medicate their loved ones or themselves, with cannabis, and to know that we, with some level of privilege in this country, have been able to do so, and then speak out, trying to get people to change their minds and look at it differently. And so we do have a medical program, and people will say, well, that's enough, that's all I agree with, right? Like Tim Jarrett, all I agree with, I don't want to give him anymore. This is all we need. And as you said, the accessibility is such an issue, and the affordability. So, in being a mother and a steward of the community, and trying to leave the world a better place for your daughter, you have shifted into just full legalization of cannabis for various reasons. And I want to say, the veterans that I work with, I'm sure you see it in the dispensary, Joe, they are not happy about being on a registry that admits that they are doing something federally illegal.
No, they're not. There's a lot of issues that vets come in to vent their frustrations about. A lot of it has to do with the VA, but
Rightly so.
Yeah,
in
I
their
mean,
defense,
yeah,
Thank you for listening to them.
they deserve every ounce of recognition that they get when they come in. And I've got people, I deal with people who fought in World War II. I deal with people who fought in Nam who can't speak correctly because of Agent Orange. I deal with people my age who are traumatized from things they did in Afghanistan. I mean,
So when people say, "Oh wow, you work in a dispensary and you sell weed, that must be really cool," is that like all the stuff you just said? Is that what flushes through your head? Like it's not cool what we do to our vets, and that these people can't afford their medicine. And I mean, do you think about all of that?
Absolutely. I tell people at the dispensary every day that we get a lot of young people who have a lot of enthusiasm for the industry, and I'd love to work in a dispensary. And it's like, okay, I like your enthusiasm. Your attitude is great. Let me explain to you a few things about what working in a dispensary in Florida is actually like.
And how highly regulated
It's highly regulated. It's highly corporatized, which I think is a big part of the problem when it comes to
vertical licensing,
affordability and accessibility. And, it's a very competitive market. It's a job. You're not sitting around listening to music, smoking pot all day.
Right.
You're dealing with, thousands of dollars of mostly cash because we can't accept any federal funds, meaning you can't come in and pay with your credit card because cannabis is federally illegal and therefore banks will not do business with us.
So Mo, we really saw a big movement in medical when we did see the kids out front, when we saw Charlotte, and when Canna Moms became really, really prominent and visible, and people started to look at the real truth of why this medicine is necessary. And so now, do you think it's going to be the moms that are going to continue to move the needle toward full legalization? Is that what WISE is about?
Yeah. And so I want to make it clear a lot of the discussion is on the transition from medical to adult use or the broadening of our advocacy. I co-authored the state's first CME program for physicians on cannabis in Florida. I'm heavily integrated into the medical program, and I work every single day with patients regarding dosing, products, routes of administration, et cetera. That is something that will always have my heart. So I'm not replacing one for the other.
Yes,
We found the right time. We've known for about half a decade kind of how we were going to broaden those horizons. But we really needed the right time and the right setup to be able to take the messaging of adult use, home grow, et cetera, at the right time that people were ready to receive it. And right now, I think the conversation is about personal freedoms over COVID, especially. You have these faux freedom fighters who are anti-masks and anti-vaccine mandates. And but if they're against a plant, obviously that would be the litmus test. So right now is a great time to be having those conversations. But yes, I do believe that the moms are what are going to kind of finally get the rest of the dominoes to fall. So that's not to say that there haven't been amazing people involved for many decades from all demographics. But I do think that in most major social, a lot of people don't know history, where none of us are taught history as it actually happened, right? But moms were heavily involved in every modern social change that occurred, from creating alcohol prohibition to ending it. The war on drugs was heavily aimed at mothers. We're going to save your children. And so the truth is, now that we know that prohibition has been harming our families and our children, cannabis is not dangerous, but prohibition is. I do think that it's mothers' places to come out and say this is harming our children and our society.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the point that we are not trying to replace a medical program. Cannabis is medicine, but it is also a plant that should be accessible to anybody in this country without being on a list, without being criminalized, stigmatized, without losing any of their other rights. And we're just not there yet. So what does WISE stand for? WISE. What does that anagram mean?
So, Women's Initiative for a Safe and Equitable Florida is WISE Florida. And the idea, the premise of that is, in fact, a mom founded, mom run, mother heavy messaging towards, the same things that we talk about when we talk about bringing our vets home. Who was at the helm of most of those organizations? Those vets' moms and spouses and wives, mothers of their children, right? And when you talk about the YMCA, any community oriented program is so mom heavy in the founding and the running and the messaging that this is just another. And that's part of breaking that stigma is creating the idea that if moms are on board with something, there's a reason and people might want to listen and hear why.
Absolutely. And that old saying, ain't nobody happy if mama ain't happy. That is very true.
Absolutely right.
Mothers run families, mothers run the worlds. And I think because we really do understand that we're trying to leave the world a better place for our children. And we're trying to instill within our children the type of character that forces them to do the same. And so what can we do to get more educated on WISE Florida, to get more involved? I am a proud founding supporter, so thank you for including me on that list. So what can we do to be better? Do we call our Congress people? Are we writing letters? Do you need a check? What can we do?
Yeah, I think that upcoming people do not realize the amount of time and money that these types of things take. Not just as nonprofits, but as actual initiatives. It was $12 million to get medical passed in Florida. And there are corporate entities who are super excited about people being able to grow this in their own backyard. And that's not to say that there aren't some, but the idea that they're just going to be throwing millions at something that is going to be effective, but for the people, right? Because these won't be corporate oriented, which in all reality, any corporation who helps with these is the most beloved by the community. And as a cause-driven consumer community, it would be smart of them. But yeah, absolutely. Any type of fundraising, awareness raising, holding events, bringing education to the forefront. First and foremost would be going to wiseflorida.org and submitting your information, signing up for the emails, and or contacting me directly. If there is something that you think in your region of the state you can offer in regards to fundraising, event throwing, awareness raising, we'll be doing a lot of events at universities. So university student groups are going to be helping organize those throughout the state. We've got amazing groups in just about every region of the state right now, and partnerships, people actually wanting to do the work. And if you can't do the work, then donating is a beautiful thing because it's a very expensive process.
Yeah, you can donate your time, your talent, or your treasure, or if you have all three, we'll take that too, for sure. So what is the ultimate goal here? Are you going to be involved in writing proposed legislation, or what? I know that it's a long road of education, and advocacy. So I don't want to say, what are y'all going to produce in a year? But what is the long-term goal? How
the
will
long-term goal is legislation. So we have worked on legislation for several years and will continue to do so. We would like to see standalone equity-driven legislation, et cetera, but we also will be passing a ballot initiative in 2024. So we have a couple years to do that. It's really not a lot of time. It's very expensive, and I'm tired. I genuinely am a mom of a cancer kid, and the other parents whose messages really resonate with their communities are also very busy mothers. We have real lives. We have real children. So any help that can be offered, this really needs to be a community effort for a few reasons. But first and foremost, if we want to make sure that what does pass in 2024 is truly for us as the caregivers and the patients in Florida, first and foremost, the vulnerable demographics, the people who are harmed most by the war on drugs laws, these are people who are going to benefit from this. Myself, I can say with absolute certainty, we know just by the statistics, most patients, most cannabis consumers in Florida are not legal medical patients and will never be. I myself, the idea that I'd have to sign up for a registry and have a sheriff be able to pull my tag number up on my car and see my medical information. That's absurd. That's absolutely not freedom. And I need to be able to grow it in my backyard to bring it in and juice it. We know that the plant, not with the psychoactive components that come from, heating it up or drying it out, but the raw plant itself as a non-psychoactive plant has immense health benefits. These are things that we really need to take into consideration, and we only have a couple years to do it. The time is right at this exact moment. And if you don't strike when the iron's hot with these types of things, they just don't happen.
Yeah. And I think moms are the right ambassadors. And, I admit when I first started learning about things like home grow, it just sounded like bullshit. It just sounded like, people wanting to say, oh, they need it because it nurtures them and you have to have a large amount. Once you learn about the actual science of the plant, and as you said, the THCA that is not activated into THC. So it's not psychoactive, but it is excellent for cancer patients, but it takes a large amount of material, raw material to juice to be able to do that. So education is always the answer to 99% of the world's problems. And I do want to touch on something else that you talked about, equity. What does equity mean when we are proposing legislation and walking it through after it passes, fingers crossed, through implementation? What does equity mean to you? Why is that important?
Well, equity means something different to every individual, right? And in every different aspect of American life. So with the war on drugs specifically, you have to include things that actually repair damage that has been done. So for instance, if you look a lot like me and you don't have no-knock raids being conducted in your neighborhood, do you ever question why? You have 7-year-old little girls dying in no-knock raids in Black neighborhoods. So we know that the war on drugs was a war on Black and brown people. There's absolutely no debate about that. This is in writing. There's no confidential files left from that time period, or maybe there are, but we know that the intent was to further marginalize Black and brown people.
From the Nixon era, you're talking about. We have
Anslinger to Nixon, and this was an ongoing process for decades, actually starting in the late 1800s. But as we know and talk about it today, right from the 1940s up until the war on drugs was announced, which also, if you look at those speeches, the First Lady was directly addressing mothers in the entire pitch for the war on drugs. But I think when you talk about equity, those are the things that have to be considered. In Florida, we had something called the Pigford license. So whereas in California, you have over 10,000 cannabis licensees, in Florida, because our Republicans really believe in freedom and open markets, we have 22 licensees here, and only about 15 of which are even active. And so one license out of, now there will be 45 upcoming, so the market is actually doubling almost overnight. We'll have one license that was dedicated to somebody who was injured by the agricultural laws of decades past. So the Pigford suit was a lawsuit against the department, USDA, regarding they couldn't get loans. They couldn't get help financially the same way white farmers were. And so because of that, they were already behind, right? So you had slavery, you had Jim Crow laws, then the war on drugs was meant to kind of replace those and to continue segregation and marginalization. And so we had one license granted under the Black Farmers Association or Pigford lawsuit. That's simply ridiculous. We need to be creating integrated into statute, legislation, rules, the licensing process, all of these things need to have equity integrated. So rather than doing like one token thing here or there that only a handful of people are ever going to benefit from, we really need to be looking at what the over-policing, the over-incarceration, the over-criminalization of marginalized already vulnerable demographics, and say, how can we create programs, communities, and industries that actually repair that damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 239 is very conservative. We are conservative Republican. Tim himself, I don't want to speak for him, but much more conservative in his political views than I am. I'm a crazy libertarian, and so I don't like any organized politics. I think it's all problematic. But what you're saying is, I think there's a lot of pushback in the 239 when we hear things like equity and special programs like us to give any type of minorities, whether that's women or anybody else, any special access to anything. But we have had documented failures along the system. Things like Black farmers could not have one of the initial 5 licenses, could not apply for it in Florida because there was a requirement that they belong to a group for 30 years, that 30 years ago, they didn't allow Black people to become members. So once you really get down into the nitty gritty of the legislation and the application process and all of that, you start to see, oh, okay, this is a problem because, and this is how we can fix it. So we're not talking about giving special access to anybody. We're talking about having really thoughtful discussions about what legislation should look like so that it is accessible for everyone.
And to be completely honest, it's almost neither here nor there. You have some audiences that just aren't the right audience. So whereas passing something in Tallahassee, it's not going to take your conservative, citizens of your county to make that happen. Mm-hmm. And so I think that you have to create equations that say, okay, the majority of Floridians lean this way or this way. And these are the conversations that should be happening in those groups. First and foremost, if you believe in personal freedoms and open markets, et cetera, if you believe that you don't want the government coming into your home, you don't want tyranny, this is a no-brainer, period. If you have seen the injury to the economy in Florida and post-COVID economy recovery, this is at the number one, creative ideas for that list. So there are a lot of talking points for specific demographics, and we don't need everyone on board with each of those messages. Mm-hmm. Of course, I would love for everybody to be equally educated and understanding and compassionate. But the truth of the matter is different things matter more to different people. And throughout the state of Florida, being as diverse as we are, and as connected as the moms are to their own communities, I think those messages are often personalized.
Absolutely. And, I always say that cannabis is a conservative issue for all of the reasons that you just listed, but also it is inevitable. And so I think that most of our leadership across the state has realized that. And if you want to have any control over it, if you want to have any investment in it, any benefit from it to your area, your family, your farm, whatever else, you better get involved and, really try to understand what that legislation is and what the consequences are going to be. Joe, you've been very quiet. Do you have anything to add or ask? No?
I appreciate the conversation that's being had. I definitely think that things are moving in the right direction. I get these questions every day from people about, well, what do you think it's going to look like in a year? How long is it going to take to legalize? And I say, I don't know. Yeah. You're in a state where optimism is probably not the best route to getting what you want. It's more about like kind of what you're doing, just pounding the rock and staying at it day after day, organizing,
Yeah.
So it's tricky. You've got the state government, you've got the federal government, all of whom have their own agenda. You've got all of these very large corporations down here who all have different ways of looking at it and doing things. So yeah, it's a very complex issue and these things take time, but,
and it's controversial. So, you have to really give it up to people that have been willing to step into the light and put their reputation and image out there to say, this is something that I believe in.
Absolutely.
Well, let me just be very clear that we've actually been aiming for 2024 for about half a decade. So that's not just a number we just recently pulled or decided over the pandemic was right. That's been a very strategic. You'll even find some of the existing organizations kind of started using our recommended verbiage. But when we launch our stuff, the intention has been for many, many years to aim for 2024. So strategically, that was always the right time. But the pandemic just created an atmosphere that we couldn't have asked for. I mean, there's something going on right now in regards to freedom and government tyranny and corruption, and those are things we never in a million years could have paid for. And we're just really lucky that it happened at the exact right time that we were already aiming for.
Absolutely. The marathon is finally paying off timing wise, right?
Exactly.
So, okay. One more time. I know that your time is valuable, and I can't thank you enough for being on here. And I hope that we've said enough to our regular viewers. This is not necessarily the view of the 239 Studios or Tim, but it is a very complex issue that I hope everybody looks into and tries to educate themselves on. So if they want to educate themselves through Wise Florida, that is, what is that website again?
wiseflorida.org. And as we move in the next month towards our 2024, goals and announcements, the entire website will update to reflect that.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on, and keep us updated here in the 239 of how we can help. And of course, me personally, I'm a big fan. Thanks for everything you do. And we hung up on her. All right. Thank you, Diana, for figuring that out for me. I could not do that on my own. So very impactful, right? Like we make a lot of weed jokes, and but it's a very complex issue. It's not all about sick kids. It's not all about, the war on drugs. It's not all about money, but yet all of those things get rolled up into one complicated issue that it's here. So no matter how you feel about it, it's coming to a neighborhood near you.
Well, yes and no. I mean, do I think, that's the goal, obviously.
Well, not the goal of everyone. A lot of people still think that it's the devil's lettuce and that people are just driving around impaired.
Well, yeah, but those aren't people who are going to be those people. You're not going to change those people's minds.
Well, I don't need to. I put the education out there, and then it's up to them on what their position is. That's not up to me to change people's minds. And also you have to change their heart first. So it really just takes somebody. It's not a joke. That's psychology.
Yeah, I know. It's just a very hallmark thing to say.
Well, psychology says people feel, they don't think. And so you have to change the way that they feel, which means, unfortunately, we do have to, show you the sick child before you understand the ramifications. And a lot of people think that that is exploitive. And, it's something we've talked about before. It is the only power some of these patients have, and they absolutely love the opportunity to do it and educate. But aside from that, we do have to change people's opinions before they're open to fact. And so I think that people now know enough people that maybe are a medical patient that is somebody that they know and trust and respect. And so it's starting to change the conversation.
Well, I think a big part of the issue is patience. Not patience, but patience.
Not patience the people, but patience like being patient.
Right. So, when you talk about changing people's minds, changing their heart, changing how they feel about things, that all takes time. And, so I feel like there's a lot of advocates out there whose heart and mind are in the right place, but they make what they feel is a logical argument, and someone's not willing to listen to them, and then they get frustrated, and it's like you can't just flip a switch.
Yeah,
and
you don't control people,
and change the mind of 40 million people or whatever it is.
So we were going to show the Mike Tyson video and say that is not how to change people's attitudes toward cannabis, but we're running really late. It was important to get all of that information. I don't know what you're mumbling about. It was important to get all the information out and hijack the 239 studio while Tim is out on vacation. So Thank you, Tim. I hope you're having a great time. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And now you have to do the obligatory fist bump with me because that's how we end the show. So
But
239.
you have a ring on. That's going to hurt.
Oh, my God. 239 Uncensored. I don't even know. Goodbye. Thank you for
All
watching.
right.
And we are out. You're a horrible